Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Studio Insights, a podcast brought to you by Provost Studio. I'm your host, Tyler Kern. Thanks so much for joining us here for another episode of the show. Now, today, we're talking lighting. We're talking lighting design, specifically when it comes to smaller production studios like video studios, podcast studios, those sorts of things that might be in places like just your typical office building. What are some of the challenges there for lighting and so on and so forth? So that's what today's podcast is going to be about. Luckily, here on the podcast today, we have an expert. His name is Phile Widmer. He is broadcast lighting designer, and he has worked at the Disney ABC television group, as well as for his own company, Widmer Designs. We are pumped to have Phil here on the podcast joining. Of course, as always, Peter Provost joining us here today on the podcast as well, president and director of design at Provost Studio. Peter, welcome.
Hey, thanks.
Excellent. Always good to have everyone here on the show today. So, Phil, let's start off. Just give us a little bit of your background first and foremost, just a little bit of your bio on your history in lighting and how you got to where you are today as a broadcast lighting designer.
I'll try and sum up I think it's something like 35 plus years of doing lighting design. It's probably even more than that, but I don't want to admit to that.
So you're only 28. How's that possible?
Yeah, I know. It's not. It's it's some type of weird warp thing, with space. But anyway. So, like a lot of, I guess, young kids, young students in high school, I was involved in the AV club, and I also love to cut or get out of class. So I wound up being drawn to the AV club, which was responsible for running and maintaining the theater space. And when I was there weren't a whole lot of other people that knew anything about the lighting system or the lights inside the space. And a teacher just threw me a packet of papers and said, "Here, go figure it out." And to be honest, over a period of about a year of doing different events in the space and having one other outside LD come in and change everything that I thought I had finally figured out, I learned the hard way what it is, what a lighting system is and how it operates and functions. And from there, after finishing high school, I wound up going to California Institute of the Arts, otherwise known as CalArts, and I got a degree in performing arts design and technology, majoring in lighting design. And while I was in school, unlike a lot of other facilities or universities and such, where you might get one lighting project to do over the course of your 4 years there, I did about 200 and, really got to know my craft well there. Graduated. At that point, I was not doing broadcast. I was strictly doing theater. I had done multiple projects from the smallest of theaters to the largest of theaters in New York, and eventually a friend of mine approached me about doing some television, some broadcast. And to make a real long story short, I wound up starting to work with a magician doing IMAG. So there was video playback during a live event, and I kind of started playing with the light levels to make those IMAG screens look as good as possible. And jumping ahead a few years, I then started working for at that time, it was just strictly WABC. It wasn't owned by Disney, but eventually Disney did buy out WABC, which is part of Eyewitness News, and also live with Kelly and Ryan at this point. But when I started, it was live with Regis and Kathy Lee, and I've been with that show for 20 plus years, going through all the different hosts leading up to the current day right now. So with doing this stuff at ABC, I also have run and maintained my freelance business that I've had all along. It has gone from doing theater now going into strictly broadcast. And when I say broadcast, I'm talking about anything that's basically ingested through a camera lens and then transmitted and received and visualized on a monitor or any type of screen like that. So that's sort of my background in 2 minutes or less.
I love it. And I suppose that the interesting thing is that you've done, some of the biggest television shows and studios and things like that, things that a lot of people get to see, but then you also get to see and experience some of the challenges of working in unique environments like office buildings with some of these studios that are coming into corporate spaces, which is something we've talked a lot about on the podcast. So Tell us a little bit about what it's been like getting to see, studios start to pop up maybe in spaces that weren't designed or made or, ready for podcasts or for, broadcasts originally, but now they are becoming those types of spaces. What kinds of challenges are presented from putting studios into office spaces?
Right. Well, I'm going to go back a little bit, not to pat myself on the back, but I really saw this coming 10, plus years ago, before people were really doing it. I was just starting to be asked to do things in office environment, not only at WBC but at other places as well, and it created its own set of challenges. A pre-existing grid like you would have in a formal studio wasn't there, and then the infrastructure for the most part is already there and in place, and then you have a bunch of obstacles you have to work around, whereas in a studio it's kind of set up for scenic and lighting and audio, to be able to be installed and tweaked as necessary without much of an obstacle in place. So doing a small a corporate studio space, a small office space, anything like that, the client wants to be more of a permanent situation, we have to obviously go in, have a conversation with the clients, and Peter will back me up on this. Find out exactly what's in the back of their head, what do they want to use this space for, and as they're shooting, how do they want to shoot it? Are there multiple people involved in the shoot? Is there one person who's involved that does everything, and wants a push button situation, or a turnkey situation, make it easy as possible. So, after we have all those conversations and we've looked at the site, then it's kind of putting the puzzle pieces together and figuring out, okay, where do we go from here? And normally at this point, a budget is kind of in the back of everybody's mind, but it's not at the forefront. So as you dig it through and you figure out the obstacles and put the puzzle pieces together, you start getting a bigger and better idea of what the budget is actually going to be. And then, you start having conversations with the client and realize quickly that the client thought that, they could use 2 lights and clamp them to the ceiling. And that's their idea of what lighting would be. Whereas Peter and myself is a more, no, you need multiple lights, front light, back light, field lights, lights on the set, lights built into the set in order for it to, pull off whatever that image or whatever that marching order is that the client gave to you in the first place. As I said, there's multiple issues with the physical part of it, but I always try to go back to, what is the client trying to do? Why is he spending time and energy and money putting this project together? And normally it's, like anything else, it's communication. He's trying to communicate either internally to other people within, his project, corporation, or people outside of a corporation that they're trying to set an image, and they want those people to pick up on those images that they're putting out there and the communication they're putting out there, and hopefully buy into whatever it is that they're trying to sell or put across the people or influence people on. So we're basically, Peter and I are helping to influence or helping to market whatever it is they're doing, to their audience. So, and we have to keep that in mind too. Who is their audience? What does their audience want? So, lighting design is more than just pointing a light at something. Lighting design and scenic design is about, and I'm going to go back to, caveman sitting around the fire. We're about telling a story. We're helping to tell that story somehow. We're trying to add another layer to that story as far as what do we want to communicate, or what does that client want to communicate to people. So that's where we start. Once we get past that and we figure out how we want to influence or how we want to communicate, and then we get into the nuts and bolts of, are we putting a flat up, with a nice backdrop on it? Are we putting a video wall in so that way they can have multiple, sets of imagery, depending on whether, Peter and I have done projects where, multiple people share the same space and they're using it for different reasons in trying to communicate different things to different people. So, we're involved in trying to figure out what that's all about. And then from there, we have to dig deeper and say, hey, you know, how are you doing? How do you feel like, or what do you want this studio to be, and how do you want it to operate on day one? And how do you see that same space being used 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now? Is it just something where we're going to throw together and it's just a short-term thing because the corporation or the business is only going to be there for a year or two and then they're going to move on and do something bigger and grander? Or is it something where, no, this is our home, and we're going to be here for 15 years, so we want to make sure we have flexibility down the road with the lighting design, possibly with the scenic design, to change things, as time progresses. We all know that, change is inevitable. Change is going to happen. So, we want to make sure that we don't box the client into, as a lighting designer, into some type of system where they're not going to be happy, or they're going to be having to spend more money for upgrades down the road than they really needed to, if there was some forethought and they used professionals, in the beginning steps. So, that's why we like to come in and at least consult with the clients and talk to them and, see how we can help them out. Peter and I know we both like to be known as, the stand-up, the truthful, the straightforward, the straight shooters. We're not there to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. We're there to facilitate the needs of whatever it is that client needs.
I think building on that, Phil, one of the challenges that both scenic and lighting have typically with these types of projects is knowing how much flexibility to build in versus the level of investment a client wants to make. And so oftentimes, if it's a smaller video production space, sometimes the client really only wants to do a one shot and you basically see it here, right? Planning for lighting for that is much different than the same size space, but wanting to do a round table with one guest plus three hosts, or sorry, one host plus three guests, right? And so then it becomes the lens is now out here. Multiple talent positions need to be lit, and the infrastructure or the equipment that needs to support that is much different than just a one person seated or stand up position. And so oftentimes though the client doesn't know yet, right? And so that makes it even more challenging in terms of really working with the client and figuring out what they want to do and get those use cases out on paper very early on so that both the scenic and the lighting solutions can accommodate.
Right. So one of the things I know I always ask of Peter very early on, pretty much as he's starting to formulate what his scenic design is what are those camera angles? Show me a ground plan, show me the angles, so that way I can figure out, what those cameras are looking at, whether it's camera one, doing a single on whoever the talent is, or camera three on the single coming across the opposite direction. And seeing what that's looking at, and then also the center camera, which could be used for a close-up sometimes, or doing the wide shot as well, or using the two outside cameras, as I said before, with the singles, that could also zoom out slightly and be giving you a relationship shot. So, besides lighting the talent, softly and making sure they look as good as possible, we have to make sure that lighting wise and scenic wise, as we're looking past the talent, that we're not falling off into a black hole and we're falling off the set, or, falling off an area that wasn't supposed to be shot. And, once Peter and I walk out the door, after we're done with the project, we try and make sure the talent knows, sort of shooting parameters. But, you're at the mercy of whoever's running the studio. We're not there 24/7 after we leave, so we try and set it up to be as I don't want to say foolproof, but as foolproof as possible once we walk out the door.
Phil, what do you think? What do you think the biggest difference is between the challenges of lighting the daytime show that you light versus the last corporate studio that we did up on the Upper East Side for a financial services company? Like,
right. I think the biggest difference is depth of field. You don't have that depth of field anymore. So a smaller space means there's smaller distance between the camera and the talent, and less room between the talent and the background. So you have to be very careful with how much light is on the talent, how much light is back behind the talent, how the cameras are set up. I'm a lighting designer, but I know just enough about cameras to be dangerous as well. You have to be talking with whoever's in charge of the cameras as well to make sure that the proper lenses are on the cameras, so that way it doesn't look like a one-dimensional shot, that there's some dimension to that shot, and hopefully you can get that background when you want to fall off slightly, maybe be a little bit out of focus, and really pull the talent out of the background and highlight them so that way they pop and they look good.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge, at least for me, is knowing how we like to approach the lighting of the set, where ideally the scenic has internal lighting, right? Glowy bits.
Right. Yeah.
But then it also has that layer of front lighting that you provide. In addition to that, then the talent is in front of that, which also has front, back, side light. And so to be able to create a level of depth and even a level of contrast within a small space is a challenge.
It's a big challenge, because you're throwing a sizable amount of soft light at the talent, and whatever's not hitting the talent is then going past the talent, and then
right
when you don't have much room between the talent and the scenic,
yep.
It's hitting the scenery. So you can look at it two ways. Oh great, I don't have to spend as much money on the set in throwing light at it because I've got all this other ambient light hitting it. But on the other side, part of it is, well, now I don't have as much control, and how are we gonna control it so that way I do have control and I could still make that talent pop out?
Yep, exactly.
One of the things I wanted to follow up on that you talked about earlier, Phil, was the idea that a lot of people don't know that lighting design is more than just pointing a light at something and turning it on, right? So what sorts of things do you want people to know about lighting design? You probably already covered a lot of it, but when you walk into a space, are there things that you wish more people knew about what your process is going to have to be and what all that entails and that sort of thing?
Well, I guess I like people to do their homework, and I think people kind of come into meetings sometimes already with certain thoughts pre-molded into their brains, and maybe they're not as open to the organic process that I like to go through with them. No, just give me some lights. Just point some lights over there. Just put them up on the ceiling. And
why are you asking so many questions?
Right. Yeah, and Peter will know, when I go in and I talk to a client for the first time, I've got about 3 pages of questions that I need to go through, and it's soup to nuts. And it's like I said, it's not just the nuts and bolts of it; it's the other side of it. As what are we trying to do here? How are we going to pull this off? And Peter and I aren't here to spend every last penny that the client has, but we do want to make sure that they have their options. And sometimes we give them 3 options. We say, here's plan A, here's plan B, here's plan C, or we can phase it as well. Maybe the first year we do phase 1 and we give you this amount, and then next year we can move forward and give you a little bit more, and then third year and do it that way. So what else do I want the client to know? I want the clients, listen, I want the clients to know that I'm there for them. Widmer Designs, my company, is there for them, and we're going to take care of them, and we're going to hand them a product that is going to be easy to use, and it's going to last, hopefully a long time, and hopefully they're not going to have a lot of problems down the road with maintaining the system as well. I Peter and I have worked in circumstances where we've gone in. There was another client out of the Midwest that we worked with many years ago, and they had a small studio. Actually, they had two spaces, but one studio was already up and running, and they had some gaffer grip type guys that would come in there and do a lot of lighting for them, and most of it was freestanding off the floor. And every time they did a shoot, they'd have to move the cameras, move the lights, and it was a big process, and it cost a lot of money. And there are multiple clients we have that kind of go out and find that DP slash gaffer guy, and they rely on him for making sure that their broadcasts are whatever quality they want it to be, and day out. What Peter and I try and do, or at least I try and do, is I try and come into the space and set up a lighting system that's normally held from the ceiling or the grid, something where they're not having to reinvent the wheel every time they have a new shoot. They can go in, they can turn on the lighting system, whether it has one button or multiple buttons, or maybe it doesn't have any buttons. Maybe it's a control console where there's already cues wrote in the board, but it's set up so that way the client and whoever's shooting it can easily turn the lights on and either just start shooting, or if they want to start manipulating something because it's St. Patrick's Day and they want green accents all over the set. And Peter and I have already designed in accent lights all over the place that can change to green. They can do that as well. So that's kind of what I want from the clients when I'm meeting with them.
Walking in with 3 pages of notes, I think, makes you qualified to be a podcast host as well. So, if you want a side career, want a side hustle, you're perfectly qualified for that as well.
There you go. Maybe you can mentor me, Tyler.
All right. You could teach me about lighting design, because I'm sure I need some help there, and I can teach you about podcast hosting, and this will be a symbiotic relationship.
Right. Sure. Sounds good. I love it.
I love that too. And I suppose the most interesting thing about all of this that's happening are the constraints that you have to work in, like you were talking about, within some of these office buildings and that sort of thing. And some of these spaces are just going to be unique. But I would anticipate that we will continue to see this moving forward. And so, this will continue to be a growing trend, and more people will see what companies are doing and see some of the studios they're building and be interested in doing that themselves. So just from your perspective, do you see this as a growing trend that will only continue over the next couple of years?
Listen, corporations are not going to want to spend the millions of dollars it takes to, build a building or put a full-fledged studio in a space when they can get away with, especially I'm going to call it the Zoom era, where like you and I right now are sitting in front of our laptops in broadcasting from there. Mm-hmm. So they want something reasonably priced, so that way, they can have their talent look as good as possible and do it in a space where, they don't need a grid at 18 feet, and they don't need a 40 by 100 foot studio. They want to be able to do it within the confines of, Max just moved out of that office down the hallway, and now we have a 20 by 20 foot space that, maybe we can do our small video productions in that room now, and that opens up, like I was talking about before. Okay, they're going to do that, and putting aside all what the imagery is that they want us to do, the nuts and bolts of it are, okay, is it a drop ceiling? Is it not a drop ceiling? How can we affix lights somehow up there? How can we run control signal to all those lights? How can we run power to all those lights? and what ultimately, how does the client want to use that space? A 20 by 20 foot space is not really something where you're going to have a multi-camera shoot and really have it come off well over a long period of time. They might be happy within the short term, but unless you're spending the money on LED monitors where you can change the imagery in the background all the time, they're, we can help them, but it'll be tough. It'll be tough on them. So, the more, I guess the rule of thumb for me, as far as the small spaces, is the more space you have that you can put your cameras and put your furniture and put your scenery in there, the better. And oh, by the way, don't forget, you're probably going to be storing stuff too. You're not always going to need all those cameras on tripods. That sofa that you use one day, maybe you want 3 chairs. So don't expect to store all that equipment in the space and be happy with the space. See if there's another room down the hallway where you can put something as well.
Really, really good advice. Really excellent stuff. This has been a really fascinating conversation, and I've loved getting to learn a little bit more from Phil today on lighting. I'm sure we're just scratching the surface on what we could talk about, but this has been a really fascinating conversation. So, guys, thank you again so much for joining us for this episode, talking a little bit more about lighting, especially for these small production and video studios that are popping up much, much more these days. It's been an absolute pleasure. Phil, thank you for joining us here on the podcast.
Great. Thanks. And, if anybody wants to reach out, obviously, I think you normally attach Provost Studios to the podcast, but it's widmerdesigns.com, WIDMERDESIGNS.com. And all my contact information and our work is posted there as well. So check it out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Please reach out and learn more, have conversations. If you want to learn more about Phil and everything that he's doing in the world of lighting design, make sure to reach out. WidmerDesigns.com is the place to go. Peter, thanks for joining us for another episode, man. It's been a pleasure.
I really appreciate it, Phil. I know I'm just happy that we have this platform that I can kind of share with experts like you. And I appreciate it.
I appreciate the invitation, and I love sharing knowledge with you and with your audience.
Absolutely.
Excellent stuff. Everyone, thank you for tuning into another episode of Studio Insights, a podcast from Provost Studio. Of course, for more, visit the Provost website if you want to reach out, get in touch with Peter, and have conversations about what this might look like in your space as well. So make sure to do that, and stay tuned for upcoming episodes of the show. We'll be back soon with more expertise on all things studios in the very near future. But for this one, for our guest today, Phil Widmer, and of course, Peter Provost, I'm Tyler Curran. We'll talk to you again soon.